Hello, everyone, and welcome to Window into the Seminary podcast. Today I'm here with Bro Alexis. Bro Alexis, we're really happy to have you here with us.
Thank you for inviting me once more, Brother Ricardo.
Today we're going to discuss a book about Han Kang.
Yes,
The
yes,
book
it's hard to pronounce.
yes, the book is called The Vegetarian. So, what can you tell us about this book, brother?
Yes, first of all, you know, we're humanists and we're trying to expand our horizons. And it came the suggestion from our professor. He said, why don't you read, since you are very interested in expanding your readings, why don't you read the Nobel Prize for this year of literature? And I was like, yeah, sure. Turns out to be a South Korean woman who just won the Nobel Prize 5 months ago in October. And turns out to be a huge boom in Korean literature. And so I said to myself, okay, I want to see what she has to say to today's society, right? And it turned out to be very, very interesting. Nothing alike which that I expected. Different from Western literature, but my main interest to discover new literature and modern new literature.
Right. And it's really interesting to consider this book specifically, as you say, because it's Eastern literature, right? So there are different ways to look at the world because we are so far apart and we have different traditions, different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But an interesting aspect that, as you mentioned, that she's from South Korea, maybe she went through a hard life. Didn't she go through different episodes, like because of the government, the historical context that she was living in?
Yes, exactly. That's one key aspect of her formation as a early writer. First off, yes, like the big frame. We're men, she's a woman. We're Western, she's Eastern. So that's already a huge separation, right? But at the same time, the beautiful thing about it, literature brings us together. Or at least we try to listen to each other, what do we have to say, right? Yes, and in terms of her formation or her childhood, you know, in early 20th century in Korea, there was this struggle, political struggle between democratics and socialism, communism, right? So in 1980, there's a famous Wangyu Rising. I'm sorry for the misspelling, but turns out to be that she used to live in that city when she was 9 years old. She moved from that city a couple months before the massacre occurred. So it was a pro-democratic movement, mainly encouraged by students and academic professors. And the government of those times suppressed the movement by killing by massive murdering. So she felt, in some sense, touched by that experience, right? It is not until 3 years later, when she's 12 years old, she discovers at her house a photo album by a German journalist, a photo album which contained like pictures and pictures of the massacre. And she says to herself, my family just moved from there 3 years ago. And we could have been those, but we weren't. Why? And why did the government react that way? And why am I still alive? So she tells that herself, like that first experience of human brutality and not understanding why we do what we do as humans sometimes, that struck her really, really hard.
Right, that's really interesting to consider. And I believe that later she became a creative writing teacher, right, at the Institute of Art
In
Seoul, right?
yes.
And she taught for many years, more than 15, something like that. And then she won the Nobel just last year, 2024. But it's really interesting to consider how having had or being close to an experience of suffering, uh, yeah, motivated her to keep digging into these topics about human nature, and then writing this novel that ended up being a great success, right?
Yes. She says in her interviews, my way of dealing with these existential questions, it is about writing. And through my writing, I try to propose an answer for these existential questions. I don't think she regards herself as a philosopher, and I don't think she tries to do so. But it's more simple than that. She tries to explore the themes of human being and human actions. In fact, she has a book called Human Acts, purely. And she tries to delve into those topics just by her writing. And she says, like, it just comes alive. It comes from me, a question, an inquiry, and I try to write about it. And by doing so, I try to share my view and my experience with plenty of people. She was an academic at the Seoul Institute of Arts. Then she taught creative writing. Then she did a master's at some American college, 2 years only. And around 2011, she decides to quit her job as a teacher, and she starts writing. The very first novel that she wrote, it's called, it is not The Vegetarian, but it was like, Vegetarian was the second or the third one. And it was published on 2016, and it was published in 2014, and it won a very important prize on 2016 to the best foreign book translated into English. Mm-hmm. Actually, the translator, the woman, Deborah Smith, she's very famous for her translations. So she has been well regarded, like at least 8 to 10 years ago, Han Kang. And in that sense, it is not a surprise or out of the bloom that she won the Nobel. I understand that she has been well regarded from past years, so that could give a good sense of her writing has been listened to by Westerners from a number of years now.
Right, and as you said at the beginning, this is also to consider what people nowadays can relate to, because if it's a novel that has gotten that much recognition, it's because people can relate to it, or maybe there's some line of thought that they also want to live in their own lives. So with that being said, can you tell us a brief summary about the book?
Sure. It's actually a pretty short novel. Consists of 3 parts, and there's the protagonist, okay? Young Hai. She's a woman, she's a wife. And she lives a very regular life. In fact, the introductory line of the book tells like Young Hai was a very normal wife to a very normal husband. And very early in the book, she has nightmares regarding animal slaughter, and she herself looks at herself bathed in blood and having murdered like animals, tons of animals. And that scene turns out to be terrific for her. She wakes up in the night and starts throwing away all the meat from the fridge. And in that moment, her husband says she's crazy. She went mad. Novel develops, and she never says why she became vegetarian, okay, throughout the 3 parts of the book. The novel develops, creating struggle among her family and her inner circle. Then she goes to have dinner with her parents and her sister and her husband. And that scene turns out to be like horrible for her. Her parents hear at that moment that she's vegetarian, and they cannot stand it. So they oblige her to eat meat, and it's a very awful scene. Like the brother-in-law, her husband are holding her back against the wall. The dad is trying to put meat into her mouth, and she couldn't stand it. She spits. She passes away. And the first part deals with her family, her parents, and her husband. She gets divorced because of her decision of remaining vegetarian. And now she lives on her apartment by her own. And progressively, she stops eating. And well, it's the least possible because she doesn't want to harm nature by her acts of eating. Then the second part consists on the view of her brother-in-law, which is a modern artist, contemporary one, and he looks at her as if she were an object or an interesting artistic object, and he actually makes a painting of her and a video recording of her as a modern piece of art, and that's the curiosity of man, according to my view, the curiosity of man on how we act and why we do what we do. Then, the third part, she's gravely ill at the hospital because she has stopped eating, and her sister is taking care of her. Hospital and psychiatrist. She's like jumping back and forth. And it is inevitably that she will die. And her sister is just regretting the time that she lost with her when they were kids. And so the third part is filled with memories of them both recalling their childhood and their time together. And the sister constantly asks herself, could I have done something different for her? Could I have understood her better, cared for her more? And so this is the consequence of our decisions, how they affect to people around us. And progressively, her thought goes from not eating meat to progressively transform into a plant and to integrate with nature and to stop harming nature. And she remains faithful and loyal to her thought until the end. She doesn't die, but she amazes tons of people at the psychiatrist and at the hospital by her decision. And also the topic, the book touches a lot on her body. There's constant allusions to her body and how she knows that owns her body, and no one can take that away from her. So that's more or less a summary of the book.
It was really good, brother. Thank you for sharing. And something really amazing about this story is how radical she was, right? Because she decided that she was going to stop eating meat, and then from one day to the other, she just stops. And even though this is a decision that's going to have consequences, that's going to lead her to her divorce, right? She's going to be alone after that, and eventually her health is gonna go down, right? It's gonna be failing. But even though with all of that, she still decides to stay strong with this decision, and I think that's a value for all of us to be able to make the decisions for what we think is right, and to be able to push through and to persevere in that. But then also, I see a lot of tolerance and acceptance, right? Because it's kind of like we see it a lot today in society, also that need for that tolerance and that acceptance. That, it has to be a little bit balanced, like, because sometimes the radicality is good, but you have to make sure that it's the right thing, right? Because if not, all this tolerance and this acceptance, but then doesn't mean that you can just do whatever, right? Because if not, then what is the sense of having laws, of having rules? All that is there to help us, and I think that's really important to recover.
Yeah, you can't just decide by yourself in a whim and pretending that that won't affect you, nor your family, nor your future. And yes, there's a value on braveness and loyalty to the set of values that you regard in high standard. But this is mostly portrayed in the first part. There's tons of people around her who tell her, you should eat meat, you should eat more, you should take care of yourself, you should take care of your husband, of your life. And kind of she portrays it as wanting to, all of those external people wanting to influence her and just separate her from her decision. But in our Western point of view, that's our family in the end, right? Our family here in the Seminary of Formators who try to, okay, you're deciding this, but be aware that we around you, we see this, from your decision. And it's a radicality that must be able to listen to what others say.
Yes, yes. Well, is there one last message, practical advice that you got from this book that you would like to share?
Yes, also I think on the basis of our decisions and the lies of the enemy. We're humans, and Adam and Eve were fooled, and we are not exempt of that, of being fooled. We can think, and we can see, analyze, and in the end decide. Radical or not decisions in our lives, right? But to pay attention to that inner voice in our minds, in our hearts, whether it confirms our decision, whether it opposes it, or whether it questions it, right? And that touches the conscience, our conscience. There are good decisions, but they have to be consulted with our conscience, with God. There are bad decisions which evidently are opposed by our conscience. And so I would say that a big message from the book, it is our conscience. Because if not, you said it, what's the point of having laws, having the Ten Commandments to obey a certain set of rules and a social arrangement? What's the point of that if I can do whatever I want? Yes, we can, but following the right path and one that is not harmful for us.
Right. And at the end of the day, the motivation for this well-formed conscience, as you mentioned, is that relationship with Jesus Christ, which brings everything to meaning. And at the end, it's a beautiful reality that we're called to heaven, that we're called to so much more. So thank you, Brother Alexis, for this great book, this great discussion. And thanks, everyone, for watching. Stay tuned for more episodes.